The sun bled low over the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the dry bones of the prairie town. Dust hovered in the air, turning gold in the last light, settling slow on cracked boards and weathered faces. The town didn't have a name anymore. If it ever did, it had been swallowed by wind and time. All that remained was the groan of wooden signs, the silence of shuttered windows, and the stink of cheap whiskey wafting from a saloon. He rode in just as the wind changed, bitter and cold despite the heat. A tall man, lean and lined, wrapped in an old duster that had seen more gunfights than sermons. His horse was half lame, his boots worn thin, but his eyes were the kind that saw everything and gave nothing in return. He carried no badge, but the way he sat the saddle made people remember what justice used to look like. Folks called him Marshal out of habit, though he hadn't answered to the title in years. He didn't come for law. He came because something inside him stirred like an old wound waking up. The commotion started before he reached the square. Shouting, laughter, the kind that smelled of cruelty. He dismounted slow, boots kissing dust, and walked through the alleyways like a man stalking a ghost. What he found hit harder than a bullet. 3 girls stood barefoot on a wagon. A man, drunk and yellow-toothed, held a bottle in one hand and waved a rusted pistol in the other. "Ain't no law here saying I can't trade what's mine," he shouted. His coat was torn, his eyes feral. 3 strong girls. Pretty too. Startin' bid. $100 or a good rifle. The oldest girl couldn't have been more than 20. She stared down the crowd with a jaw set like flint. Defiance radiated from her. Chin high, hands clenched, eyes daring anyone to look away. Beside her, the middle sister trembled, a tear slipping down her cheek, lips moving in silent prayer. The youngest stood stone still, dark hair shadowing her face. She looked not scared but absent, as if the soul had already stepped out of her body and shut the door behind it. He didn't speak at first, just watched. The crowd murmured, restless. Some joked. Others looked away. No one moved. The drunk man spat. "Ain't my fault their mother ran off. Ain't my fault the land turned to dust. Man's got debts. These here are payment." The marshal stepped forward, slow like thunder rolling over hills. The drunk saw him and laughed. "You want one, old man? Got 3 to choose from. First bid takes her home." He didn't answer with words, just reached into his coat and pulled out a sack, leather, stitched shut with wax thread. He tossed it at the drunk's feet. It hit with a thud. Coins inside. Heavy ones. Silver. The crowd hushed. "That's enough for all 3, the marshal said, voice low and even. "But you don't get it back." The drunk looked confused. "You buy in or stealin'? I'm ending it." Laughter turned nervous. The drunk bent to grab the bag, but the marshal stepped forward again. "Close now. Too close." The pistol dropped from the drunk's shaking fingers before he even realized he'd let go. The oldest girl blinked, just once. A soft sound escaped the middle one's throat. The youngest never moved. "No trouble," the drunk muttered. "Just business." "This ain't business," the marshal replied. "It's a sin dressed in daylight." He looked to the girls. "You'll come with me, if you want. If not, I won't stop you." His voice cracked then, barely, like a board under pressure. The oldest jumped down first. She didn't take his hand. Didn't need to. The middle girl followed, eyes wide. The youngest stepped down last, moving like sleep. Not once did she look back. They rode out in silence. The sun dipped below the edge of the earth, setting the sky on fire. Dust rose behind them, blotting out the town like a bad memory. No one followed. The prairie opened up ahead, miles of nothing and sky. Hawks circled overhead. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. They stopped only once that night, at the edge of a dry creek bed. He built a fire from sagebrush and pine, the flames small and shivering. The girls sat together, shoulders touching, but no words passed between them. He watched them for a long while. The way the oldest kept checking their surroundings. The way the middle girl picked burrs from her sister's dress. The way the youngest stared into the fire, unmoving. He didn't ask their names. He didn't give his. Instead, he said, "My place is north. Half day's ride. I got 3 sons. Workin' land too stubborn to die. They'll have questions, but they'll listen. No one answered. The fire popped. After a long time, the oldest girl asked, "Why'd you do it?" He didn't meet her gaze. Just tossed another branch into the fire and said, "Because someone should have, once." The prairie wind picked up again, carrying the cold. It swept through the tall grass like a whisper. He sat back, hat low, listening. 3 girls watched the fire. 1 man kept silent. Somewhere, the ghosts they carried huddled in the dark, waiting for morning. The sun rose behind them, casting a pale orange light across the horizon as they approached the homestead. It wasn't grand, just a long, low house with a sagging roof, a rusted windmill that creaked in protest, and a corral where 3 horses waited like sentries. The land around it was stubborn and tired, patched with dry grass and clumps of sage, the earth cracked like old skin. The fence posts leaned like drunks after a long war, but someone had kept them upright just enough to matter. 3 young men stood outside, watching as the riders approached. One leaned against a fence post, arms folded, expression unreadable. He was tall, built like a stone wall, with eyes that had seen things and learned not to speak of them. The second son stood a few steps behind him, hands on his hips, hair wind-wild and sunburned. He carried tension like a blade, sharp, twitching, half ready to explode. The third was seated on the porch step, sketchbook balanced on one knee, pencil frozen mid-line as the girls dismounted. His face was soft, a contrast to the others, but his silence ran deeper. It was not shyness, it was history. The Marshal stepped down, knees cracking. He didn't offer explanation, just gave the reins a flick and said, "They'll be staying." The eldest son tilted his head, studied the girls with something colder than judgment, something more like calculation. The second son barked out a short laugh, half incredulous, half intrigued. The youngest only looked up, then down again, pencil scratching softly. The girls stood like stray animals at a new gate. The oldest one squared her shoulders, scanning the house, the men, the distance between. The middle girl shifted nervously, her fingers twitching at her sides like they missed holding something, maybe a doll, maybe a weapon. The youngest girl stared at the cracked porch, her face blank as slate, jaw clenched so tightly her cheeks trembled. The Marshal spoke again, this time slower. "They've been hurt. They're not to be questioned, not to be touched, not unless they say so." The second son scoffed. "Ain't that the law of the land already?" The old man's voice dropped to gravel. "It is now." He led them inside, without another word. The house smelled of dust and pine tar, with firewood stacked high beside the hearth. 3 rooms, 1 long table, the floor worn to shine beneath boot soles. The girls were shown to the spare room, small but clean. A single oil lamp flickered on the windowsill. The bed creaked when the youngest sat on it. She didn't look up. Supper was quiet. The Marshal spooned out stew thick with beans and old meat. The girls ate with the discipline of famine. The middle one whispered thanks. The eldest never blinked. The youngest ate slow, her spoon trembling with each bite. No one asked what happened. No one had to. Later, the Marshal sat on the porch with a cigar half lit between his fingers. His sons joined him one by one. The second son spoke first. "You bring them here to marry us?" The question lingered in the dry air. The old man didn't answer. The eldest son frowned. "They ain't property. Didn't say they were." The second son spat into the dirt. "But this place don't run on kindness, Pa. It runs on work. Ain't no room for charity." "They're not charity," the Marshal said quietly. "They're owed more than we can give. So we give what we can." The youngest son stayed silent, still sketching. When he turned the pad, the old man caught a glimpse, a rough pencil sketch of the middle girl's face. Laughing. But she hadn't laughed once. The next few days passed like slow thunder. The girls worked without asking, without complaint. The eldest helped mend fences, her hands raw and bleeding, but she never flinched. The second son watched her too long one morning, and she snapped at him, quick, sharp, eyes burning. He smiled after, though not unkindly. The middle girl took to the garden, coaxing green from dry soil, as if whispering to it. She hummed while she worked, strange little tunes that sounded like lullabies from nowhere. Once she caught the youngest son watching her, and she smiled. He looked away, color rising in his cheeks. The youngest girl stayed in the barn. She slept in the hayloft, even when offered a bed. Spoke to no one. But each night, the third son found new drawings left on the porch. The dog sleeping, a lizard on a rock, the windmill spinning like a wheel of fire. They didn't talk about the arrangement. Not yet. But the air shifted, thick with unspoken decisions. The sons worked harder. The girls laughed a little more. Something began to take shape, fragile and unnamed. Then came the tracks. The second son spotted them near the creek. 3 horses, fresh prints. One set led close to the house, turned back. That night, the marshal oiled his rifle in silence. "They'll come," he said. "They always do when you take what they think is theirs." The eldest daughter stood in the doorway, backlit by the fire. "We're not theirs." "No," he said. "You're not." She didn't smile, but something in her face softened. Just for a breath. The wind picked up again, whispering through the shutters. Inside, the fire crackled low. Outside, the dark stretched its fingers across the land, waiting. The rain came on sudden, slantwise and cold, slicing across the land like the memory of a blade. It was the kind of storm that soaked through to the bone, that turned dust into black tar and filled the hollows of the earth with secrets. The marshal stood beneath the awning of the barn, eyes on the ridge. His coat dripped steadily, hat sagging under the weight of water, rifle slung loose in his arms. He hadn't spoken in hours. The eldest daughter stood beside him, arms crossed, face unreadable. The others were inside, tucked away with lamps and blankets, but she'd insisted on keeping watch. She didn't flinch when the thunder rolled, didn't blink when lightning stitched the sky. "They're close," she said. The marshal nodded. 2 days maybe. 1 if they ride hard. She looked at him then, eyes dark and steady. "You could give us back. Say, you made a mistake. They might leave you be." His jaw worked, slow and thoughtful, like grinding stones. No man should have to bargain with evil to keep peace. "And yet we all have," she murmured. Inside, the house had grown tense with waiting. The second son cleaned his pistol until the metal gleamed like ice. He paced in short, erratic lines, the storm in his chest louder than the one outside. The middle girl sat in the kitchen, peeling apples with practice care, the knife's rhythm her only calm. Every now and then, she glanced toward the window, fingers trembling. Upstairs, the youngest girl lay still beneath a quilt, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The youngest son sat nearby with his sketchbook, drawing things he didn't understand. Shadows on the walls, blood on feathers, a face half lost to time. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. That night, the marshal laid out a plan, spoken low over the supper table, lit by one lamp and the crackle of firewood. "They'll come for the girls. Maybe to trade, maybe to kill. Either way, we meet them down by the gully. It's narrow. Makes their numbers count less." The eldest son nodded once, slow and solid. The second cracked his knuckles, eager, eyes too bright. The youngest just looked at his father and said, "What if they don't ride in angry? What if they come like kin?" The marshal didn't answer. He didn't need to. The middle girl reached for the eldest's hand beneath the table. They touched fingers, brief but sure. Across from them, the youngest girl whispered something no one heard. Dawn came sharp and colorless. The storm had passed, but the air felt heavier for it. The sky hung low and gray, stretching wide and still. Birds didn't sing. The wind held its breath. They rode out before first light. The girls stayed behind under protest, locked inside with the youngest son holding the key. He wasn't much with a gun, but he'd shoot if needed. He promised them that. And they believed him. The gully was just as narrow as the marshal remembered, cut deep into the earth like a scar. He took cover near a limestone outcrop. His sons fanned out along the ridge. They waited and waited. The riders came mid-morning. 3 of them, hard men in weathered coats, rifles slung low. One wore a scar across his face like a lightning bolt. Another had a red bandana and a necklace of old brass keys. The third looked young, almost boyish, but his eyes were empty as an abandoned mine shaft. They stopped short of the gully, horses restless beneath them. The one with the scar called out, voice slick with false charm. "We ain't come for blood, Marshal. Just want what was promised." The old man stepped forward. "They weren't yours to promise." Scarface spat into the dirt. "Their father thinks otherwise. He sold his soul for a bottle. You won't find the rest of it here." Red Bandana laughed. "You really gonna draw steel for 3 wild girls who ain't even yours?" "They're mine now," the eldest son said, rifle barrel resting easy against his shoulder. The boyish one shifted in his saddle. "We don't need to do this." "No," said the marshal. "You don't." But they did. It happened fast. Red Bandana jerked for his gun, but the second son fired first. Scarface tried to flank, caught a bullet to the chest and fell hard, dust rising like smoke. The boyish one rode back fast, too fast to aim, disappearing over the hill. Silence followed, thick as grief. The second son crouched beside the body of Red Bandana, breathing hard, pistol still hot in his grip. "Too easy," he muttered. The marshal didn't move. Just watched the ridge where the boy had fled. "It's never easy," he said. "It just don't bleed right away." They buried the dead in the dry wash, no markers, no words. The land didn't care for eulogies. Back at the homestead, the youngest girl stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself like armor. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew. The youngest son approached her, hesitant. She turned slowly, face unreadable. "They're gone," he said. She nodded once. "But they'll send more." "Maybe," he said. "But you won't face them alone." Inside, the eldest daughter stitched a torn sleeve while the second son paced again, slower now, more thoughtful. The middle girl knelt at the hearth, feeding kindling into a fire that flickered low and warm. The marshal sat by the window, eyes on the horizon. The fight was not finished, but something had shifted. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family now, and families don't run. The land grew quiet in the days that followed, but not peaceful. Stillness in the west was never a promise. It was a breath before thunder, a whisper before smoke. The marshal knew it. He felt it in his bones, the way old soldiers feel the storm coming, even under a cloudless sky. He said little now, rising before the sun and returning well after it fell, patrolling the ridges, watching the wind. The girls settled into the rhythm of the homestead like roots into dry soil, tough, slow, necessary. The eldest took charge of the horses, riding out with the eldest son each morning, her silence matching his stride. They didn't speak much, but they moved well together, like they'd known the same kind of losses, buried the same ghosts. One morning, she handed him a rope of braided horsehair. "For your hand," she said simply. He took it and tied it without looking at her, but his throat tightened when he spoke. "Thank you." The middle girl sang again, sometimes in the garden, sometimes under her breath as she carried water, or hung laundry to dry on the line. Her voice was fragile but unwavering. She and the youngest son had started sharing sketches, torn pages exchanged without a word. She drew dreams, lanterns floating over rivers, women with wings, wolves that cried like men. He drew truth. Her smile when she thought no one saw, the lines on the marshal's face, the way dust hung in sunbeams like stars waiting to fall. The youngest girl still spoke rarely, but she watched everything. One evening, the second son caught her standing alone in the barn, staring up at the rafters like they held some hidden message. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't answer, but she handed him a drawing. 3 graves on a hill, and a 4th left empty. He didn't sleep that night. It was near the end of the week when the rider came. Dusty and fast, coat flapping like a black flag behind him. The marshal met him at the edge of the property, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. The rider didn't flinch, just passed over a piece of folded parchment and turned back without a word. The marshal read it once, then twice. His jaw locked tight. He gathered them all at dusk around the fire pit outside. The orange glow danced on their faces, drawing out lines of fear and fury, of quiet courage. He spoke slowly, like he was peeling back something old and rotten. "The girl's father's dead. a slit throat in a saloon down in Redvale. But the man he sold them to, he's still breathing. The name was known to the Marshal. To many. Jedediah Black. A land baron turned slaver, turned butcher. Word was, he ran a compound of mercenaries and lost men. Those too cruel for the war and too wild for peace. He'd ridden through towns like a curse, claiming what he pleased under the guise of debt and false law. And now, he claimed the girls were still his. He's demanding them returned. 3 days, the Marshal said. The fire popped. No one moved. What if we leave? The middle girl whispered. Go east. They'll follow, said the eldest son. Men like that don't care about laws. They care about being obeyed. They want to make a lesson of us, the eldest girl said. Her voice did not tremble. We stay. The Marshal nodded once. Then we prepare. They set to work as if it were harvest, repairing the outer fences, digging fresh lines of sight, reinforcing the barn doors. The second son strung traps through the trees like a spider. The youngest son carved tall posts from cedar and painted them with symbols the youngest girl showed him. Marks meant to warn or confuse or perhaps just to say, here we stand. On the second night, the eldest son brought the eldest girl to the old chapel ruin on the edge of their land. Just timber bones now, open to the sky. They stood beneath the stars, lantern between them. I never asked your name, he said. You never needed it, she replied. Still, she gave it. He said it once, softly, like a vow. They kissed without hurry. It was not the first kiss of youth, but something older, harder, like two survivors choosing to hope. The third morning arrived blood-red and silent. They came at noon. 12 riders. Banners black. Dust curling behind them like smoke from a fire not yet started. At their center rode Jedediah Black, tall, lean, wrapped in wolfskin and bone. His eyes were the color of a storm before it breaks. They stopped just beyond rifle range. He raised a hand. The Marshal stepped forward alone. Marshal, Black said, voice slick as oil. You've got property that don't belong to you. No man owns a soul, the Marshal replied. Black smiled, slow and cruel. Then you won't mind bleeding for them. He turned to his men and raised 2 fingers. The first shot came from the trees, second son, high in the pines. One rider fell backward without a sound. Then the gully exploded. Smoke, shouting, fire. Chaos tore through the air. The homestead held. The eldest daughter fought like a wildfire, side by side with her chosen. The youngest girl stood in the loft window, picking off attackers with a rifle nearly as long as she was tall. Her eyes never blinked. The middle girl was everywhere, dragging ammo, pressing bandages, lighting fires to shield their retreat. Black breached the house alone, rage boiling from his skin. The Marshal waited in the parlor. They fought with knives. The old man bled early, but not deep. He moved like history, slow, brutal, undeniable. Black was faster, younger, but lacked one thing, purpose. The fight ended at the hearth, where Black stumbled on the rug, and the Marshal drove the knife in just under his ribs. You never understood, he said through gritted teeth. Family isn't bought, it's built. Black died without a sound. Outside, the last of his men fled. By nightfall, the silence returned. But this time it was earned. The daughters sat by the fire, arms intertwined. The sons stood behind them, shoulders heavy, hearts open. The Marshal leaned against the doorframe, bloody but alive, watching the stars blink on one by one. The youngest girl placed a 4th drawing on the table. The house whole and warm, with light pouring from every window. No graves, just a home. And the wind no longer howled. It sang.